Hey, Joe Martin here. You've seen our commercials over the years, and you may be wondering, what's in it for me? Well, ITI Technical College has been selected by Forbes magazine as a top 32-year college. But even more than that, the reason we do this is you. Our tagline is, for a better life, and we mean that, for you to be able to have the life you've always dreamed about, to do the things for your family you've always dreamed about. And it can begin here, where we are dedicated to your success, because here at ITI, the reason we do it is you.
This is Sports 225 with Lee Feinswag, and I'm Lee Feinswag. We're in our 24th year, if you count Sports Monday and Sports 225, and the only way that could happen is, well, it's my show.
My best friend, Lee Feinswag, look at the Christmas.
Sports 225 is brought to you by Breck. And now, me.
I always like when a new guy comes on Sports 225, and I got the newest of the new guys on tonight. Brooks Kubena, who is the new football writer for The Advocate. When I say new, I mean he's been here since the season began and gone through the wars, and I'm going to give you a joke you haven't heard at all this week. Texas A&M just scored again.
Well, LSU's soon to follow.
Yeah, right, exactly. I would imagine that most people out there have never written a story on deadline. And if you have, you know where I'm going with this. But if you haven't, trust me, it's hard, okay? Even if it's a real simple sporting event and they tell you, you got X amount of space and you've got a time limit. Well, on a Saturday night for a major metropolitan newspaper, and yes, The Advocate is one, and you have a 6:30 start, so you're thinking ahead of time. Football game starts at 6:30. Maybe it goes 3 hours, but usually just a little bit less. So, we're looking at 9:30. Oh, 11 o'clock, deadline, I can crush this thing. I can write a hell of a story until the game goes 5 hours. How many revisions and what kind of pressures were you under during that circumstance?
More than a dozen changes in that game. I mean, every overtime, each half it changed, you're shifting it back towards the other team winning.
Right.
And, I mean, the pressure is there, and throughout the season, it's always been fire your story at the buzzer, whatever it's. So that's the same pressure every game. Just the difference was, man, there's so many things happening now. All of those pieces of context that would make a game clear are changing each time. It's like, oh, gosh, now we got the halfback pass touchdown. Like, now that has to be kind of set up in a way,
right,
throughout that entire process. And you can kind of feel it up in the press box yourself because you're working with the other people too. And their own rumblings are coming up. And I remember in that seventh overtime, whenever the Aggies scored that final time, the pass interference happens, and they're lining up to go for two, and everybody's shifted their story, Aggies going to win, whatever else. And then the false start happens, and everybody just groans. Like you got to be kidding me.
Because everybody thought they were
right,
going
to
go to an eighth overtime.
Right, eight overtime, we got to do this again,
Yeah.
But, I mean, just an insane game to cover. And, after years and years, whenever we look back on this, it is one of the most epic games in college football history, and it's never about reporters and how you tell a story, but just to be part of that and having given context that in history is definitely something of meaning to me early in my career.
Well, actually, and God, this goes back to before you were born, LSU played an epic college basketball game against Loyola Marymount in the Assembly Center that was, I want to say, 148-141. with two of the most unbelievable run-and-gun teams. And the game really had no impact on the world. It was a non-conference, I think a February game, but there were a lot of big names in it, of course, Shaquille being one of them. And it's one of those where you ask any basketball fan who's been here forever, that would be the one. Well, this football game will supplant that in everybody's mind because it was an unbelievable sporting event. And I should preface this, I don't know that I even said this. We were talking, of course, about the LSU 7-overtime defeat at Texas A&M last Saturday night, where the final was 74-72. What was the score at the end of regulation?
It was tied at 31. Yeah.
It's hard to remember.
31.
Actually, you got outscored 43-41 after the last buzzer.
And that was the interesting thing because Dave Aranda came into that being a semifinalist for the Frank Broyles Award given to the top assistant coach. And LSU's scoring defense was at 12. And then after the game, you had 43 points. They went up to 20, went up 18, 19. And all of a sudden, Aranda's not in the finalists for the Broyles Award. You wonder if that game had anything to do with it. But, yeah, 43 points added to it.
What ultimately, since we started talking about writing and the deadline, what was your original deadline? And, hope to file so they could get first edition of printout.
First was 9:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then everything just went to hell probably after that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, well, the story, the write-throughs are at 11:30 because the first deadline is, all right, get it at the buzzer, and then, because sometimes even if at 9:40 they'll hold it.
That game ended at 10:35, if memory serves,
Yeah. 11 o'clock was the final deadline. And
I'm sorry, not 10:35, 11:35.
Yeah.
5 hours. Right.
So, the story you turned in was obviously not going to get quotes anymore because the fans rushed the field, so that delays coaches and players getting in. The elevator was backed up, so I actually sprinted down the stadium, down the ramp, and I wasn't familiar with Kyle Field. One ramp shared by all of the stadium, and I'm running right around these people trying to get down there.
Knock anybody down?
No, fortunately, and I didn't get tripped up either. I did get touched by a couple of people that were being playful. I ended up on a service elevator going down, and it took me outside the stadium. I had to run back in, and I'm just gasping, and I don't even know if it could be heard by television that was recording it, but I got there for the last two questions for Ogeron, and they ended up, he had been pretty repetitive in his post-game speech about not that 1 second shouldn't have been there, and that was pretty much what he had been saying the whole time.
Hi, I'm the human dislike button. You may recognize me as the guy who enforces rules at Breck Parks. Check out my amazing presentation. Did you know? Motorized vehicles are not allowed in Breck Parks. Sales and solicitation are prohibited without permission from Breck. And my favorite rule, keep Breck Parks clean by placing all trash in trash cans. Come on, you can do this. For more information about these and other Breck rules, please visit breck.org/HDB.
All right, we're back on Sports 225, hanging out with Brooks Kubena. He is the LSU football writer for The Advocate. And in the first segment, we talked a lot about the LSU Texas A&M football game, which, of course, we could continue on and do 2 hours worth. But before we put that to rest, all right, so your Sunday was a lot busier than it normally would have been because, A, you were up so late and trying to regroup, and then B, you had to readdress this game that normally you would have just put to bed and moved on. But since it was both the last game of the regular season and there was so much crapola that went along with it, so you had to break down all the so-called controversial calls.
Yeah,
what'd you learn?
Unfortunately, the game was not the focus on Sunday. Right. You go through this 7 overtime thriller that'll go in history, and all of a sudden we're going through Zapruder film. That's how Sunday went. And after the game, and I had folks in Houston. That's who I stayed with because I wanted to do Thanksgiving with them. And I got back home 6 a.m. Sunday, and I wake up to the buzz of my phone. Big thing going to sleep that night was figuring out who the guy in the red shirt was, and that was
okay. So let's set it up. So number one, not only does Texas A&M beat LSU in 7 overtimes, there were multiple calls that LSU considered unfavorable and controversial, and then there was an on-the-field altercation in which somebody from Texas A&M ultimately got hit by Kevin Falk, who's on the LSU staff, but because that same person hit Steve Cragthorpe, who's also on staff and also has Parkinson's and a pacemaker because all that began to enter in. All right, so now I'll throw it to you from there.
Right, and
so you got your hours of sleep, and then there you go.
Waking up, and then ultimately finding multiple people to confirm that this is Cole Fisher, the nephew of Jimbo, and all the film that comes in afterward, and that was Sunday. Piecing together, and Monday, whenever Texas A&M started talking, and finding their pieces of it, and it wasn't until yesterday that it all kind of started, and even today we're still waiting to see what the SEC does about the altercation. And if you look at the videos, and there's plenty of them, you can see that it looks like a former wide receiver coach for Texas A&M, Damian Craig, running across, and as what Texas A&M Twitter people have called red shirt guy, is running. The one person on the football field wearing red. It was, helpful to see. And he's running after, and Damian Craig has been said by multiple accounts to have been, talking smack across the sideline. And you see the red shirt guy, Cole Fisher going across him. And as they're going away, Cragthorpe comes up. Fisher appears to shove him. And then Kevin Falk sees what he sees, doesn't like that, comes in, and then there's the tussle. Fisher throws a couple punches, and then you also see the strong free safety for LSU, John Battle, land a punch on Cole. So you're still wondering what the SEC will do about that as well, seeing that in the video. So there's still things that we're waiting to see resolved from there. But the 2 days of that is just took a lot from the game, but also the controversial calls. Mm-hmm. The SEC is still kind of talking about those things. Scott Rabelais, a columnist at The Advocate, talked to Steve Shaw yesterday, who coordinates the officials, and they're sticking by a lot about their calls. Mm-hmm. And the two that I think are actual gripes, the number one call that I think actually is debatable is the final pass interference that was called on Greedy Williams in the corner.
Right. And
Greedy contests that and then gets a unsportsmanlike penalty, and then they ultimately get that 2-point conversion to win. There's multiple people have talked about that call.
Greedy Williams must have said a magic word.
Must have.
Yeah. Because that ref, he just turned
quickly
and couldn't believe it.
Right.
Threw his hat up in the air.
And you would feel like, in the heat of the game, Greedy is pretty justified to be upset about that call.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. No doubt.
And the other play that looks is whether Kellen Mond's knee was down whenever he picked the ball up to throw.
That was, without replay, right?
Yeah. You don't know what that is.
Because that was so instantaneous, and you see that happen so often on returns and other situations. Yeah, no. The one thing, let me just say this about that. Watching that game, A&M marches down the field and has a beautiful drive to tie the game at the end, minus the extra point. Yeah. Has LSU on the heels, at home, go for two on the last possession of the fourth quarter. You win the game, and we never have overtime. See, I never understood not going for two there.
To go for two in that situation is the indication of a team that has nothing to lose. You'll usually see that whenever, I don't know, I feel like Texas A&M had something to lose in that game, especially Jimbo Fisher, who was hired $75 million to win that game. To bring it down into a 2-point conversion that could go, could not go. They had something at stake there and obviously thought that they could hang with LSU in overtime. This had been a back-and-forth game all through regulation. Mm-hmm. And, obviously, as it turns out, it goes in through 7 overtimes. They were evenly matched in that game. And even with some of the calls, 2 that I feel like are legitimate gripes, mm-hmm. They were very even in that game. So I would not have understood them going for 2 at the end of regulation because of the context of the scenario and Jimbo's stakes in that, and the fact that they can contest with LSU in overtime. They felt they could win, and they did. Yeah.
I appreciate that insight, and I don't disagree with you. But I just know myself, I'm screaming at the TV. Of course, I had more beers than you. You were working on deadline. All right, so speaking of people screaming at the TV and other stuff, there was this whole stuff on social media after that game about why LSU should leave the SEC because of the bias and all the stuff in Birmingham and the officials. And I got the answer for you. He's Brooks Kubena. He's the LSU football beat writer for The Advocate. And there's still a lot of football to be played. There's a bowl game that eventually, Saturday night, maybe they'll find out where they're going. And I'm Lee Feinswalk. This is Sports 225, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm the human dislike button. You may recognize me as the rules guy for Breck Parks. Sometimes the rules slip past us, so I put together this amazing presentation. Did you know? Golf practice is only allowed at designated golf facilities. Firearms, explosives, and weapons are not allowed on Breck property. Metal detecting is allowed in some parks, but go to Breck's website to learn more about this and other park rules. For more information, visit breck.org/HDB.
All right, we're back on Sports 225. Brooks Kubena is here. He is the LSU football beat writer for The Advocate. When did you start? August?
Start August 1st.
August 1st. Oh, so you had a month to acclimate and learn a little bit.
Not really. It was the very beginning of preseason
Right, but
camp.
where I was going with that was at least you had a month till a football game.
It was a very, very busy preseason camp.
Yeah, I think they always are here. You may have heard that there have been some years where there have been big fights by LSU football teams in August.
I've heard and researched.
Yes. I imagine the first thing you did was memorize the LSU football media guide.
What was good was that the first day was Ed Ogeron's speech at the Baton Rouge Rotary Club.
Right.
So basically, he went through the entire team. I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah,
This kind of helps a little bit, and what he thought about the team and things like that. And I've used that in reference throughout the season. So that was a pretty good first day to show up.
Yeah, and he's real good about that stuff and real wide open. Brooks is from Houston area, went to the University of Texas, and has worked at the newspaper in Arkansas in Little Rock called the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. And we have a lot of mutual friends from the old days who still work there. Yeah, there are some good old guy stories from the old days. But all right, so LSU during the course of the game it loses to Texas A&M, and there's this continuing theme that LSU's always getting screwed by the SEC because they're in Birmingham and they have an Alabama bias, and that the officials are always out to screw LSU. And
it goes back to the Devin
exactly,
White hit and all that.
And I still maintain that it was LSU, for example, that became the first two-loss team to win a national championship because of its strength in the SEC. And don't forget, the biggest thing about being in the SEC is that every June at the meetings in Sandestin, they get cut a check that is unparalleled in college sports in that league. Okay, so that's number one. So number two, I did a little research. Now, every Tuesday at 4:15, I go on with Matt Moscone on his radio show on 104.5 ESPN, and we talk 10 minutes of sports and 5 minutes of beer. If you never heard it, you need to check it out. The beer part's way better than my sports part. So, but to play to the crowd, I decided to do a little research and talk about just that issue. So I want to tell you this. So LSU won the National Football Championship in 2007. So now we're going into what will be the 12th year since then. So in the 11 and a half years since, okay, in a conference of 14 teams, LSU has won 16 SEC championships total. One in football in 2011 when LSU was on the way to becoming the greatest college football team in history, and then Alabama 21, LSU nothing, negating that. One time in men's basketball in 2009. Now, these are SEC championships only I'm talking about. Women's basketball, one time in 2008, and 4 times in baseball. 2009 when LSU won the NCAA championship, 2012, 15, and 17. Okay? You're talking about 6 championships in the SEC in the Big Four in 11 plus years. That's not so good, I don't think.
No, it's not great, but
it's not so good. Not for somebody who thinks that they're getting screwed and they should be like, winning SEC and national championships. Conversely, LSU has won 10 national SEC championships in that time, but all in Olympic sports. Okay, one in men's golf in 2015, which was also an NCAA title. Okay, team. One in women's outdoor track in 2008. Well, 4 total SECs, and one of those was a national championship. So you've got the 3 national championships in there. So I tell you, LSU should move to the Big 12 or the American Athletic Conference, because that's where LSU would win. If LSU went to the Big 10 or the ACC or the Pac-12, you'd have the same kind of results as this, a very mediocre decade of overall athletics in that one program. And that's the truth. Now, I'm joking, of course, because...
Yeah, I think if you were an athletic director or commissioner, you'd be fired.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because you'd be saying goodbye to that very hefty check.
Right.
But also, I mean, if you look at, let's take Florida, for example, in football. Since their championship, what's been their results?
Right. Well,
I mean,
Florida,
we were living
in that time, Florida's got a couple of national basketball championships and has won national championships in other sports as well.
Their last national championship in basketball was 2007, was it not?
I think they went back to back.
So that's the same period of time of their football. So in the same time period of this LSU era, like Florida has not done much either.
Right.
I mean, we're living in the era of Alabama in football, and that is soaking up everything. I mean, to pair that with the feeling of getting screwed by officiating is a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I get to be irreverent and do this. Whatever.
But I see the difference between the national view of what the SEC is, because it does get the benefit of the doubt of the competition. You go back to the BCS championship when they won with 2 losses. That's the national view of LSU.
Right.
And they can say, all right, well, or the SEC, they get the strength, we put them in. The bias of getting screwed by officiating is an internal thing with the SEC. So the SEC, if you're thinking like, oh, well, the SEC is against LSU and trying to promote Alabama, that has nothing to do with the national view of what they see the SEC as. So both can coexist.
Right. So for you were the Arkansas beat writer for how many years?
I covered Arkansas State.
Oh, Arkansas State.
For 1 year.
So you even had a different outside view.
Oh, they had a different view.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Arkansas was Arkansas, the Razorbacks, had basically an embargo on the entire state. Frank Broyles did not play anyone else in football, ever.
Yeah.
And because it would hurt the brand, allegedly hurt the brand. They didn't want to share the spotlight with anyone else in Arkansas, which is interesting because in Louisiana State, LSU has played other football teams from Louisiana.
Yes. Yeah.
And has that hurt the brand? No. LSU is still by far the #1 football program in LSU, and it hasn't hurt anything.
Right.
That's an interesting parallel that I would.
No, I would much
wonder
prefer,
what Arkansas
and I'm
people think
been
about.
long on record like this,
Yeah.
and of course LSU played Southeastern or played Louisiana Tech this year in football.
Louisiana Tech.
Did they play Southeastern? They played them in basketball the other day. But anyway, that's. But the point is, if you're going to have the rent-a games where you're going to pay somebody $1.2 million to come into your stadium, why not keep it in state? Especially when there's 4 other Division I programs in there. All right, hold that thought. We're way over. Whatever you were going to say, think about it and tell me during the break, and we'll pick it up. He's Brooks Kubena. He's the LSU football beat writer for The Advocate. Follow him at Kubena, Kubena, on Twitter. I'm Lee Feinswag. It's Sports 225.
Well. Looks like someone forgot all neighborhood Breck Parks close at dark.
You want another?
I think they'll pass. Amplified music and sound is prohibited without permission from Breck. No alcoholic beverages on Breck property. Smoking of tobacco products is not allowed. Use of fire is prohibited except in grills. Gotta remember, Breck wants you to have fun, but in the right way. For more info, go to breck.org/HDB.
Coming down the home stretch of another Sports 225. Thanks to John Williams from Think JCW for directing the show. Go to sports225.com, which I finally got around to updating this week, for all the show times, who's on, when, and where. We archive all the old shows at the Sports 225 TV YouTube channel, so eventually you'll not only appear on Cox 4, but also CST, and be put into posterity on YouTube. Which would be nice for your family back in Houston.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So Brooks Kubena is here. He's the LSU football beat writer for The Advocate, making his Sports 225 debut. Hasn't it been fun?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
You could do worse. You probably got interviewed
I
by some of the local media hacks around here. I'm more fun to talk to than most of them, whatever. Anyway, so he said modestly, LSU's going to go to a bowl game. The $1 million question always is where. We find out Saturday when right after the SEC championship game, then everybody finishes, the Power Fives finish up, and then the bids start being officially announced.
Right. It'll generally get sorted out by Sunday, sometime Sunday. You'll know where they're going. The ultimate thing here to know is that LSU has a very small, they don't have a chance to go into the Sugar Bowl. It's Florida being at 9 in the college football playoff rankings would put them ahead if both Alabama and Georgia go to the college football playoff, because the way the contract's set up with the Sugar Bowl, they take in order of college football playoff rankings. So not going to the Sugar Bowl. That means the 2 New Year's 6 bowls that they would have a chance at getting to are the Peach and the Fiesta. And being at number 10, it's all of these bowl games are picked by the College Football Playoff Committee. So these New Year's 6 bowls.
And let me interject.
Yeah.
Scott Rabelais, our friend and columnist for your newspaper, has made it perfectly clear to me through text that he wants to go to the Fiesta Bowl.
Oh, yeah. He's told me, too. He wants to go there. And it's possible that they will, because one of the things to know from this is that the cutoff for qualifications for these is number 12. So number 10 is a very safe spot for LSU to be. The one thing that could muddy up some things is if UCF loses, which is possible because their quarterback is injured, the highest ranked Group of 5 champion is an automatic qualifier. Now, the Peach hosted it last year, so it's likely that the Fiesta Bowl will host, whether it be UCF or if they lose, it'll be between Boise State and Fresno State, who are the other ranked opponents. If UCF loses, they'll get kicked out from 8 backward. And that would mean that it would shrink down 11 because one of the teams from the outside 25 come in, so it shrinks it to 11. And if UCF goes back, that can bring in Penn State or even Washington State.
Stop it. You're making my head hurt.
Who has 2 losses and could possibly be in a conversation to go in.
I'm in awe, and that's why I love bringing new guys in. He's Brooks Kubena. Read his stuff at theadvocate.com. Follow him on bkubena at Twitter. Thank you for coming. I really enjoyed it.
Hey, I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
We'll do it again. I'm Lee Feinswag. Thanks for watching Sports 225.
At carnival time by Baton Rouge Bay, that's the site of my story. At Spanish Town Mardi Gras, things can get blurry. See the mowers marching